All right. Thank you, Rich, and thanks for everyone being on today. We've done this webinar almost every year, so it's always fun to see where we at and what program might be the best. And having that crystal ball, I think every year is a little bit cloudy, but this year in particular. So again, I'm Robin Reid. I've been with the Department of Agricultural Economics for over 10 years now, and actually started when we were implementing the 2014 Farm Bill. So ARC and PLC, I feel like, has been something that I've been working on my entire career here at K-State. So hopefully what I share today will help you in making this decision for the upcoming year. Now, I'm going to go through a lot of stuff that's probably basic to most people, but I just want to make sure everybody has an understanding of where we're at and what the decision is and how to best go about thinking through that decision. So obviously everybody here probably knows we extended the 2018 Farm Bill for another year. That will be renegotiated here hopefully before September. Really, the drop deadline is before the end of the year. But with that, you are able to elect and enroll in ARC and PLC again, same programs, really nothing has changed other than you do have an extra month to make the decision this time around, just because of everything that was going on at the end of the year as they were just really focusing on trying to get the new Farm Bill. And then when that didn't happen, extending the old Farm Bill, all of this happened very much at the end of the year in 2024. So with that, there wasn't a longer election period than there normally is. So we have an extra month. But what I want to recommend is you really got to make this decision by March 15th. And that is because of that SCO component. And Jenny's going to talk about that after I talk about ARC and PLC. But if you're considering that on your crop insurance, then you really are making this ARC and PLC decision by March 15th. Another thing that I do not have in the slides, but I know the question was asked as we started the Zoom, and I've been getting this question by email. Are these payments in jeopardy because of the current administration's focus on cutting costs, cutting spending? I do not have any inside knowledge of the things that are going on in the administration right now. So my opinion and my thoughts are going to be based on what I've seen in the past. And that is that what I would consider these ARC and PLC payments and the economic assistance payments, I don't think those are in jeopardy of not being made. And that is because these are tied to the economic conditions of farms across the US. And as we know, when we saw the Trump administration, the last go round, when we were in the trade war with China, there were marketing facilitation payments authorized for a number of years to help farmers through those tough economic times. So I don't think either one of these are in jeopardy. The thing that this administration is focusing on is things tied to climate change, conservation, those kind of initiatives. So you'll see was a pause on some of those NRCS programs because of that. But going forward, I don't think these are in jeopardy. So we'll get that out of the way right now, and then we'll dive into getting the recommendations. Now, what I want to always remind people, the timing of these payments is hard to think through because it comes so much later than when you actually harvest the crop. So our 2025 election, so the decision we're making now is for the crop that'll be harvested either this summer for wheat or this fall for our other soybean, corn, and grain sorghum crops. And then it's an entire marketing year before we receive these payments. So the payments that you're receiving possibly this October would be for last year's crop. So I know that's hard to think through because we're looking at the prices that we see today and thinking that's the payments we're getting this October, and that's not the case. And that's why this decision is so hard, because the uncertainty of what's going to happen from September of this fall until August of 2026 is really anybody's guess. So that's why I take this as more of a risk management approach. when you're making this decision, because if any time in history, I think right now is when we're seeing the most uncertainty of what could happen with crop prices in the next year and a half. So one thing I do want to start out with, though, before we talk about making the decision, is what might we see for payments this October? So that would be, again, for the crop that was harvested last year. So Rich has a publication that he updates once a month as we see prices announced. And so our current estimates are here on what the marketing year price is in the marketing year we're in now, compared to the effective reference price from last year, and then the PLC rate is the third piece of the table here. So interestingly enough, before we added January's prices in here, we were actually seeing a 2-cent payment, PLC payment on wheat. That, since we updated to January's prices that were a little bit higher, that has been eliminated, but we are exactly at the effective reference price. So will there still be a payment? One thing I want to show you is just how that marketing year average works and why, especially with wheat, there's not a whole lot of marketing year yet to go. So this is a snapshot of the tables that you will see in Rich Llewellyn's estimates on the marketing year average price. And so how this works for wheat, so each month USDA releases a price. And that is a survey they call local elevators, larger elevators, asking what price did you pay for wheat this month and how much did you sell? Because at the end of the year, it becomes a weighted average of the price for the entire year. So again, we started this June 1st of last year, this marketing year. You can see all the wheat prices that have been announced, and then our estimates of those that are still to come out. Now, the thing on wheat is that most of the market year is already over, even though we have 5 more months of prices. And that's because most of the wheat is sold shortly after harvest. So these months shortly after harvest become very critical in the marketing year average for the year. So as I said, we are right now at 550, which is the PLC reference price for 2024. So if we do see some more drop in prices, we could get a PLC payment, but at this point it can't fall too much because again, 73% of that marketing year is already completed. On the ARC side, we would, with a county yield at average, need something below 534 to get an ARC county payment. And so we are above that. But again, if there was a wheat yield loss at the county level, we could see a payment. I wanted to show you the difference between wheat and corn when we're talking about the marketing year average. So with wheat, like I said, a lot of that gets sold at harvest. It's a little different for corn. So obviously this marketing year started September 1st. We really see some high weights typically in October and November, but January here is going to be the big month, and 13.8% of that weighted average is going to be in January. So right now we're seeing 434. That's above where we'd see a PLC payment, and that's above where we'd see an ARC payment with a normal county yield. So let's focus on the ARC county for a second. Here are the benchmark prices from last year. Again, here's our estimates. What percent of the county yield would trigger a payment is basically what I'm looking at. And as you look at wheat and corn, basically there would just need to be a small loss in county yield and there would be an ARC county payment. So my examples here, you can see 45 bushel wheat, 44 bushel wheat would be an ARC county payment. On corn, 150 bushel corn, benchmark at the county level, 144 bushel yield would start an ARC county payment. Grain sorghum is actually to where you could have even a little higher county yield and still get an ARC county payment because of that price loss. Soybeans is kind of the last one here. 95% of a normal county yield would start getting you an ARC county payment. So really what I'm saying is yield doesn't have to fall hardly at all with these prices to start kicking in an ARC county payment for this October. So we'll be keeping an eye on this and providing updates, but just know there is a good likelihood of seeing some payments again this fall. But again, that's for last year's crop. So let's get into the decision that you're here to make today, and that's the 2025 decision. We've been using this slide since the 2014 Farm Bill, just basically mapping out that payment that year, or that program that you're going to elect. So we talk only about PLC in Ark County. That's because that's what most people in Kansas are deciding between. If you do want to go Ark individual, that option is still there. That pays on 65% of your total base, and that takes all the commodities your farm and lumps them together. So again, we're going to just focus on these two. And what I like to remind people too is, so you're making ARC and PLC decisions for each crop that you have base acres in. And the key there is the crop you have base acres in. Over half of our base acres in Kansas are tied to wheat, even though we plant a lot more dryland corn, even some soybeans. So a lot of producers, you're looking at wheat base and grain sorghum base, even though you might be planting corn. So that is the commodities you want to focus on. And again, you'd get paid on 85% of those base acres. Now, Jenny's going to talk about the supplemental coverage option, but just know you're not able to do that if your crop is in Ark County. So I want to give just a quick review on these because I know we always get a lot of questions on this. Price loss coverage is just what it says. It is a price. It's a program for low prices. So there's a national market year average price, which I just walked through for last year and how that's calculated, and that gets compared to a reference price. If it's below that reference, then you get a payment. So pretty simple. Again, gets paid on 85% of your base acres in each crop. Now, I want to give you an example just because I think there's an important thing that I haven't normally talked about, and that is what is the maximum payment rate on these. So the example here, our reference price this year on wheat is $5.56. If we had a $5.50 marketing year average next year, that would be a 6-cent loss on wheat. So you would take that 6 cents per bushel times the program yield of the individual farm. So each farm has its own program yield tied to its wheat base acres. That's going to be important later on here. And then 85% of the wheat base acres. So that is how that payment's calculated. Pretty simple. The important thing that I want to stress this year is it has a much higher payment limit. So you're going to keep getting paid on this loss unless we hit loan rates. And I know I'm probably getting older than I was, but when we started, and again, I started in 2015, we said, oh, we're never going to hit loan rates, it's fine. And in 2016, we did on wheat. So I don't want to say this will never happen, but these prices in today's terms are awfully low. But the important thing is PLC will keep paying until we hit these loan rates. So that's why it's really the better price protection program. Now let's contrast that with Ark County. So this is the revenue program. There's a price and a yield component. So there's a benchmark that's set looking at 5 years of county average yields, 5 years of marketing year average prices at the national level, and that becomes your revenue guarantee. The thing I'm stressing this year, there's a payment cap on that, and you hit it quite quickly. So I'm just going to run through an example here and just show that. So if we had a county benchmark yield of 80.5 bushels, our price on wheat this year is $6.72. So that is the benchmark revenue for this fictitious county, $272 per acre. Now the important numbers to come out of that is you don't get a payment until it falls to 86% of that benchmark. So we need revenue of 234 or less to start kicking in a payment in this county. But here's the number I really want to stress. 10% of that benchmark revenue is the maximum per acre payment rate. So each county has its own max payment rate per acre for all of the different commodities. So if we had, let's say, 36 bushels in this county and a $5.50 marketing year average price, you can see our revenue is only $198. Compare that to the guarantee. It's a 36 per acre loss. but that is over our maximum payment rate. So this is all we're going to get is that 27.21 per acre on 85% of our wheat base. So our benchmark prices for this year, they are higher because again, they run off the last 5 years. So here was our wheat prices at corn is at 503 price, grain sorghum 530, soybeans 1217. Now, what have we been electing here in Kansas? I think it's always insightful to know what's your neighbor doing? What's the state doing at a whole as farmers are making this decision? Corn has been in PLC historically at pretty high levels when we had lower commodity prices. As we've had higher commodity prices, really 370 for a reference price, a lot of producers started going Ark County instead because we've had some drought issues here in Kansas too, and that was the biggest chance of a payment. Even last year already, we saw more farmers going back to PLC just because of that higher price protection. Grain sorghum, 93% of our grain sorghum base was in PLC back in 2019 and 2020. You can see kind of the same thing, but last year we were approaching 50-50 for grain sorghum base that was trending back towards PLC. Soybeans has yet to have a PLC payment. Even though this reference price is higher this year, this may be the year that could change, I don't know. But overall, Ark County has always been the preferred program. And then wheat, you can see kind of the same as grain sorghum, used to very much prefer PLC. Then it trended to Ark County. Now it's trending back to most producers preferring PLC. Okay, so if you take nothing away from this presentation, I think this slide is the one that you're probably going to want to focus on. What program should I choose? So basically, I'm just going to compare a bunch of prices for you. Here's the PLC effective reference price for each of our big Kansas crops compared to the Ark benchmark. Now, if we have an average yield, exactly the benchmark of the county, these are the prices that you will start getting a payment at. And what you can do is compare this to PLC. So for wheat, PLC will not pay till 556, Ark will pay at 578. Corn is pretty close, 433 to 426. Grain sorghum even closer at those two prices. Soybeans, I think this is the one that is gonna kind of tell people to lean a little more towards Ark County because it will pay at 1047 versus PLC at 966. But again, it always comes down to the county yield. If we have a county yield loss, it will trigger at a higher price. So less yield, we'll get payments at higher prices. So you can see those there, wheat at 642, corn 481, grain sorghum 506, and soybeans 1163. Now the other thing could happen, and I think weathermen are about as accurate as economists on a lot of this. I've seen some presentations that say we're going to have a hot, dry summer and possibly a dry spring. So we'll see. But if we don't, if we actually have a higher than average county yield, it's going to take a lower price to trigger an Ark County payment. So a 10% yield gain at the county level, you compare these prices to PLC and which one is going to trigger faster. And in this case, if we have a big crop, it could depress prices. In that case, PLC would trigger quicker. So with that in mind, I'm going to kind of go through these next ones a little quicker and then turn it over to Jenny. Here are Rich's other price publication, and that basically takes all of the marketing year average prices that are out there and pulls them in, all the projections that are out there and pulls them into one document. So you can see the last marketing year, the marketing year we're in now, and then the few estimates that are out there for next year. So corn price, again, this is anyone's guess. We got a long ways to go until this marketing year is complete. But anywhere from low to mid $4 corn are the estimates that are out there. This is the resource that I would point all of you to make your individual decision. So this is what we call the trade-off spreadsheet. And in here, you can pick your state, your county, your crop, If it's non-irrigated or irrigated or a combined county where it's all put together, if you don't get numbers in here, it's because your county irrigation type is not correct. So play around with that. And then the other thing you want to do is put in your own farm's program yield. And what that does is make these payments specific to your farm. So let's take a look at Marion County corn non-irrigated. The Olympic average county yield is 102 bushels this year for this county. The price again is 503. Multiply those together, that's your benchmark revenue. Your guaranteed revenue is 86% of that amount. Now the critical numbers on here, these are all the marketing average prices that could occur in the next marketing year. I just showed the estimates that are out there currently, says low to mid $4 corn. So at that level, PLC payments aren't going to start till 4/26. That's where you can see them start and then grow quite quickly. With an average county yield, so Marion County corn at 102 bushels per acre, you will not see a payment out of our county until we fall here. Again, that was below 433. But then those payments grow quite quickly after that. The thing that I'm going to highlight this year that I haven't in the past is this red number. And what that is what price, what marketing average price will produce a PLC payment that is bigger than the Ark County maximum. So for this farmer with an 87 bushel program yield in Marion County, it would take a marketing year average price below 367 before this PLC payment is larger than 5134, the county maximum. Now, will corn fall that amount? That's a fairly low price level. But the other thing to think about is what if we have a bigger crop? So if we moved up to 112 bushel corn, it's going to take an even lower price, like I showed earlier, to trigger an Ark County payment. So even if we're at low price levels but have a good yield, you could get in a situation where Ark County doesn't pay. So illustrating that at this bushel here, it would take basically $5.57 corn at 122 bushel county corn yield. Now irrigated crops, I'm using Scott County as an example here. It doesn't really change the picture too much other than we tend to have less variability in that county yield. So again, PLC is not going to pay till below 426. An average yield of 185 bushels won't produce an Ark County payment until below 433. On the irrigated side, it's going to take a price of 356 for that PLC payment to be higher than this amount for this farmer that has this program yield. Again, you got to change that to your own farm, and then those would be more specific. So if we do have a farm that has a really good program yield, that will lean more towards PLC because those payments will be much larger than my example here. Now let's talk soybeans for a minute. So again, the price projections that are out there, low $10, maybe even less. So if we're looking at this amount in the table, again, we don't get a PLC payment to below 966. With an average yield of 38 bushels here in Cherokee County, we'll get a payment at 1047 or less. We have to have a price below $8.12 to get more out of the PLC program than the Ark County maximum. And that maximum in this county is $45.67 per acre. So again, I really just encourage each of you to look at this for your own individual county and farm, and that's really what's going to help make this decision. On wheat, estimates out there are high $5, even closer to $6 wheat possibly. What that looks like, so I'm going to use Rooks County as an example here. So again, we got to have a price below 556. So this is actually below current estimates. And to get a PLC payment with a normal county yield of 47 bushels, it's going to take a price below 578. But again, if we have a yield loss, we look at 38 bushels, we're going to get a payment at 693. So that's a pretty high price to still have a payment. But look at the red number again. Is it going to take a price below 476 for that PLC payment on this farm, 39 bushel program yield, to be a bigger payment than Ark County? That max again, 3142 for this county. Finally, we'll wrap up here with grain sorghum. So the price estimates that are out there, high $3, low $4. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot that can happen in this next marketing year. So looking at Pratt County here, 62 bushel county yield benchmark, 530 price. So we need a revenue below 284 to get a payment. PLC payments, they're going to start at 451. So if you think back to those estimates, 451 is actually already in the money if those estimates are correct. On the Ark County side, we have to fall below 456. So really not a big difference there in what program's going to pay at what price with an average county yield. 394 is really the trade-off here. That's any price below that is going to be a bigger PLC payment than Ark County for a 58 bushel program yield in Pratt County. And again, that max is 3303. So going through all that information, this is probably what you wanted to hear, is just my slide here. Okay, Robin, what should I sign up for? And to me, it really comes down to price expectations. Obviously, we're kind of just starting in a conflict of possibly trade war, tariffs, those kind of things. Those have not hit the market too hard yet, if any. But what's going to happen in the next month, in the next 6 months, in the next year, that is really going to be the determining factor. So if you want to hedge that prices are going to be low, extremely low, then PLC is your program. That's just better price protection. But Ark County, it could trigger more likely, especially if we have the climate outlooks that I've been seeing of some dry weather this summer and possibly this spring. But again, that's going to hit the maximum payment pretty quickly. So those are the two things that you're really looking at deciding between. One thing I'll also mention, there's payment limits on these, just like there always has been. And so if you're the size of farm that you're going to hit that $125,000 payment limit or $250,000, depending on your entity structure, if you're going to hit those limits anyway, then PLC is really not going to provide that deep of price protection. So maybe Ark County is another thing to look at and consider there. And then the final thing is, do you want to use SCO? Because you can't use that on the crop-based acres that you have if they're the same commodity. So Jenny's going to get into that. I think I'm right at 30 minutes. Jenny, do you want me to hit some of the questions in the chat before you start, or what would you prefer?
Why don't you respond to those and I'll get started. And then I'll get started.
Okay. I think most of those are links that Rich dropped in the chat, so that's great. One of the questions, is there a rough basis estimate from Kansas City wheat futures so that you can use market your average for wheat? Yeah, so that's a great point, Kent. So especially when in wheat, we have so many different classes of wheat, you know, the hard red winter, white wheat, spring wheat, winter wheat, all those different, those get all combined into an all wheat price at the national level. So the wheat prices that we're seeing locally may be way different than what we're seeing at that monthly USDA number that gets announced. So I don't have offhand a comparison of Kansas City wheat futures price to that marketing year average, but typically they're lower because we get the high quality white Pacific Northwest wheat that tends to pull that average up. Rich does have some response there too that you can look at. Yeah, another question from Luke, you know, is marketing your average prices pretty well correlated to harvest prices that are used for insurance claims, so SCO? You know, that Jenny and I had been talking about this too. Really, that fall price for crop insurance is just the start of the marketing year though. And so when that gets set at harvest, again, those are big months in the weighted average right after harvest. But really that January, February price are also very big in that average for the marketing year. So we could run some correlation coefficients on that, but I do think they're probably not that high, just because there's so much marketing year that occurs after harvest. So if you have above average yields, does that lean you towards PLC? I think it definitely helps, because yeah, your PLC payments are going to grow so much quicker with a higher PLC established yield with the farm. So again, that's the use of that trade-off spreadsheet. Go ahead and put in your own program yield for your farm, and that threshold of when PLC is going to pay more than Ark County is going to be a lot higher price if you have a better program yield. So, yep. Okay, I think I hit most of the big ones there, Jenny. I'll turn it over to you, and then I'll come back on at the end if we have more questions on Ark and PLC.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Robin. I'm gonna get started on the crop insurance side. Rich, I can't see the chat, so if somebody asks a clarifying question, especially, I don't mind being interrupted during.
Okay, will do. You should have control of the slides there. Just click on it and you should have it.
Sounds good. So I'm gonna give a quick overview of SCO, the supplemental coverage option, as well as the enhanced coverage option. I'm going to talk about how these policies might be a useful risk management tool with the low profit margins we're seeing for a lot of crops for 2025 right now. Then I'm going to talk about potential payouts in 2025, as well as a new decision tool. So I'm going to go through, in terms of the decision tool, as a part of the presentation, I will give an overview for it for a specific example. And then after we go through the formal Q&A, I'll stay online and I can pull up the spreadsheet on my computer and can do a live demo, put in specific examples for anybody that wants to stick around. So I'll be available for however long anyone needs after the formal presentation is over. Okay. All right. So first of all, these high coverage policies, SCO and ECO, what they do, they're endorsements that you put on top of an existing revenue protection or yield protection policy. I'm going to use revenue protection here because that's what the majority of producers use. So you can use SCO. That'll take you up to 86% as long as you're not using ARC for the same crop that you're planting, the crop you have base acres in. You could also use the enhanced coverage option with or without SCO. A quick summary of what these do. I've talked about it in previous years, so more of a review. Happy to go into more detail, or you can talk to your crop insurance agent about these. So both of these policies have a county-based trigger, and because of that, you only get payouts when county yields are released. So if you're looking at 2025, that's going to be around June of 2026. In terms of the county-based trigger, I know this is frustrating for some people. The reason that it exists is mostly because of sound insurance design. So if you had too high of coverage levels available for individual policies, this could create some perverse incentives. So talk about moral hazard. Basically, it's about having a sound crop insurance program. Also, and perhaps more importantly, if these were individual policies for these high coverage levels, they would be even more expensive. So having that county trigger does help moderate the costs. SCO will increase your underlying yield protection or revenue protection coverage up to 86%. Again, as long as you're not using ARC. For the enhanced coverage option, you have two coverage choices. You can cover that 86% to 90% band or 86% to 95%. Again, works with YP, RP, ARC, or SCO. It's pretty it's relatively more flexible. However, you cannot use it with other area plans. So next, I'd like to give an overview of the key trade-offs between these policies. Three things you want to be aware of. These high coverage policies are going to increase your premium costs. It's more costly to insure those higher levels of your revenue. You're going to have a smaller deductible basically, so that's going to cost more. Next, the payouts are not triggered by farm level losses. So if your experience is different than the county, you might not get a payout, or you might get a payout when you don't actually have a loss. It can work both ways. For some producers, that issue of that you're not paid out till later is something you need to be aware of. The last point, it's really important to take a long-term perspective with these policies. There is that higher premium, and they're going to pay out a lot more on average, but there's still the possibility that you could go a few years without a payout. So you need to be aware of all the potential outcomes, and that definitely is one. Benefits as well. At higher coverage levels by design, you're going to have more frequent payouts. So it's going to be covering against more of your shallow losses that are experienced in the county. Also, in years when your underlying policy triggers, you're going to get larger payouts. The second point is especially relevant in Kansas. It could vary from state to state, and it is something to definitely talk to an insurance agent about. But I've looked at premiums for a lot of 80%, especially 85% revenue protection policies. And SCO tends to be a lot more affordable than that 85% revenue protection policy. So if you want or need a higher coverage level, you might want to look at these high coverage policies in terms of their relative affordability. The last point, these policies allow you to protect a larger share of your profit or a larger share of your break-even revenue before planning begins. So it gives you an idea before things get started what kind of revenue you can expect in a particular year, and you can make decisions based on that. And the issue of protecting profit or break-even revenue is really, it's a big deal in 2025, given everything we know. This next chart really demonstrates how that price cost squeeze, tight profit margins is an issue at the national level. So these are prices paid and prices received indices for crop producers at the national level. These are actually what go into setting parity prices. These are indices, so it doesn't matter which one is higher than the other. It's all relative. It's about their relationship. So if you look, the blue is prices paid and the red is prices received. If you look from 2015 to 2019, these were in balance. So those were tight margin years generally as well, but the relationship between prices paid and received, so input costs and crop prices, was stable. Then in 2020, we saw crop prices go up and expenses soon followed. Really peaked in 2022. And then crop prices started going down, but input prices stayed high. So really reflects what producers have been telling us over the past few years. In terms of 2025, what we know right now, still a lot that can happen in 2025. But it looks like input costs are gonna tick down at least. With a lot of uncertainty. On the crop price side, a lot of we're looking at 468 for corn right now. We're in price discovery, but it's not that different from last year in terms of our current expected prices. So right now, given everything we know, still looks like could be pretty tight profit margins in 2025. So how can you think about this in terms of your crop insurance decision? This is a risk management decision, so there's no right or wrong way. It's about what your personal preferences are, how a producer chooses to manage risk. You might be premium focused, so you're gonna think about how can I get my costs down. You might want to look at what's the federal government share of that premium. You might combine those. You may have a more revenue focused approach where maybe you have a specific target revenue, a break-even revenue. If you know your break-even cost, you may be looking at specific profit margins. Maybe you have to repay a loan. For this talk, because of the concern with profit margins, I'm going to be really focused on the break-even revenue, the revenue guarantee provided by crop insurance. Specifically, what revenue does a producer need to cover their costs? And how could crop insurance help with this? Especially potential shallow losses, which SCO covers, but also ARC and PLC by design are there to potentially cover relatively shallow losses. So next, I'm going to show some of the profit margins based on our crop budgets that we have on agmanager.info. We do these every year for non-irrigated and irrigated crops. So these are for a representative farm, so they're not going to exactly match individual conditions. There is a spreadsheet where you can personalize these to their operation, but they really do give an idea of the type profit margins that producers are expecting for 2025, and that underlying coverage level might not protect the typical coverage levels for a revenue protection policy might not protect all those expenses. So the first example is non-irrigated corn in Northeast Kansas. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. I know probably not everybody here is from Kansas. Non-irrigated corn, for them, their direct expenses, $433 per acre. They're about 72% of revenue. So the typical revenue protection policy might cover that. Fixed expenses, so that's largely rents and machinery costs, cash rents, machinery costs. That gets you up to $620 per acre, and that's about the same level of expected revenue today. So with those costs, it's looking like pretty tight crop profit margins, even if your costs are lower than what's in our crop budgets. For South Central Kansas, this is non-irrigated soybeans. Looking at direct expenses of $227 per acre, fixed expenses of $96, total expenses of $323 an acre. This is 82% of expected revenue. So not quite as high as the previous example, but still definitely tighter profit margins than in previous years. Next one, Southwest Kansas non-irrigated sorghum. That's looking at total expenses of $353 per acre. So that's about equivalent to the expected revenue for that year. If you look at direct expenses, input costs, so that underlying revenue protection policy, would help protect those input costs. Next, irrigated corn. There is a typo here. This is what's the number? It's over it is $1,062 for total expenses. That's about 97% of expected revenue. So again, tight profit margins. We see the same story for wheat. It's non-irrigated wheat, South Central Kansas. This is actually one of the best, most positive wheat forecasts that we have. They are negative economic profits in a lot of other regions of Kansas. This one looks a little bit better, where your total expenses are about 84% of expected revenue. So to sum up, given everything we know today, high likelihood of tight profit margins for 2025. So, a lot of producers are looking at different ways to reduce their costs. The other side of that is protecting your break-even revenue, which is what we're talking about here. Now, revenue, there's two components to that, prices and yields. And so, so I like to use this chart as a visual to think about those two different dimensions of revenue. I think one reason for doing this is you can really think through what all the potential revenue outcomes for, and then decide where you're most concerned about the risk, and where you want to say if you want to how you want to make your policy choices. So the Super Bowl actually made explaining this chart a lot easier. There are a lot of moving parts here. So we have the x-axis is yield, the change from expected yield, and the y-axis is the change from expected prices. So at the middle, you are right at the point where your actual revenue equals your expected revenue. Now, if you're in the green quadrant, you could think of this as the equals quadrant. Now, I had these colors set before the Super Bowl, so it works out pretty well. But this is the better than expected quadrant. You have both higher prices and higher yields than expected, better defense, better offense. This is where you want to be. The other hand, this quadrant down here, we'll call that the Chiefs quadrant. That's when both prices and yield are lower than expected. That's when things can get really bad. But you can also end up in situations where you have higher prices but lower yields, or lower prices but higher yields. I think it's useful to think about how different ARC or PLC or different crop insurance products provide protection in all of these scenarios. And I would also say that you can also think about this in terms of shallow losses, which ARC and PLC can play a role, also SCO. So that's where you're sort of closer to expected revenue. I can't quite see Luke's comment well, but if it's something I need to respond to, Rich, let me know. So I actually looked at where each county in Kansas fell on these different scenarios from 1990 to 2020, and for both dryland corn and irrigated corn. So for rule of thumb, about 25% of the time, 25 to 30% of the time, counties were in a situation where their actual revenue was less than 75% of expected. About half of the time, revenue was higher than expected. And then about 25% of the time, there were shallow losses. So situations where prices and yields were moving in different directions. And those shallow losses were even more common for irrigated corn, which makes sense because they don't have typically have as deep of yield losses. So let's
Jenny, sorry here.
Yep. Yep.
There is a comment from Luke.
Yep.
I think that's something that may not be fully understood by some people is that if you are farming multiple FSA farm numbers,
Yep.
some can be under ARC corn, some with no corn base, and some with PLC corn elections. You can have SCO on that policy. Your agent will just have to remove the SCO coverage from the cornfields that are under ARC at the FSA office. You just have to notify him before billing date. This is especially critical for your wheat acres.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for making that point. All right. Sorry, my mouse is a little touchy here. So if you go first here, higher prices and higher yields, this is a good year. Probably not going to get a lot of payments, but you're going to have higher income than you expected at the beginning of the year. The next scenario where you have higher yields and lower prices, this can happen when you have generally good yields across the country or a high supply. That's usually gonna lead to lower prices. This is a situation where you could still get PLC payouts, but ARC and SCO are going to be less likely. Now this one, we're in the sort of the red outcome, both lower yields and lower prices. It's much more likely that it's going to be a tough year. So here, both ARC and SCO could trigger. And again, PLC is only going to trigger if the price decline is sufficiently large. This next outcome where you have lower yields and higher prices, this is really typical in a drought situation. So if you have lower production, lower supply nationwide, that can lead to higher prices. Or if you have higher prices for any other reason and you have a local yield decline. So in this situation, PLC is not going to trigger. For ARC, the higher prices might offset the lower yields. And in that, but if you have SCO, the harvest price option could kick in, and it is going to provide more protection in this type of outcome, especially when you take a big hit on yield, but prices are high. I'd also like to introduce a concept that I called the circle of disappointment. I'm not particularly wed to the term circle of disappointment. If anybody has a better idea, let me know. But I think it's important for when you make your, ARC or PLC decision, all your crop insurance decisions, to kind of know what the different outcomes are going to be, so you're not going to be surprised, or try to avoid as many surprises as possible. The circle of disappointment, it's really the area that's inside of your deductible. And this year, if you're in that area where you're close to expected revenue, you're still going to have to pay your premiums, but you're not going to get a payout. And in an environment of tight profit margin. So I think that's something important for everybody to be aware of when you make the decision. The reason why some people might choose to use high coverage policies is that you're decreasing the size of your circle of disappointment. You're decreasing your deductible. So I called that the circle of even more disappointment. So, you're trying to protect more of that profit margin, especially for SCO or ARC or PLC, potentially in the case of a shovel loss situation. So that was a visual. Here I've kind of outlined what it looks like. So these are three outcomes that could potentially be similar with a high coverage policy. So if you are using SCO and harvest revenue is 86% of expected revenue, this could either be due to price or yield declines, or a combination of the two. You're going to be in that circle of disappointment, or you could be in a situation where harvest revenue is 75% of expected. So that's the circle of even more disappointment. SCO is going to bring you back up to 86%. Then you could be looking at an even deeper loss. Let's say harvest revenue is 65% of expected, and that's going to trigger both your underlying policy and any endorsements that you choose, again, to get you back to that area where maybe it's a little bit disappointing if your profit margins are tight, but it is lowering the deductible there. And you could do a very similar exercise. Let's say you typically use 85%, comparing it to the ECO, enhanced coverage option. I'd also like to make a note about the enhanced coverage option and hedging. So, and I've seen some people talk about how ECO can play a role in price protection. And for the typical policies that we have in Kansas, 70 to 75% of revenue protection, assuming constant yields, it's going to take a very large price decline to trigger that underlying policy. It's still catastrophic risk protection. You can see this might happen once every 20 or 30 years, especially if you look historically, but those policies are rarely going to trigger based on a price decline. Again, it could happen, and there's that catastrophic protection there. But let's look at 2024 corn. The projected price was $4.66, pretty close to what we're looking at right now. We're still in price discovery. The harvest price was $4.16. That is actually not in discovery. This was from an older presentation. I thought I deleted that. Regardless, you had an 11% decline in prices. SCO, or I see that question. So SCO and ECO will do whatever your underlying policy does. So if you have the harvest price option, it will reset to higher prices. If you pick the harvest price exclusion for your underlying policy, it's not going to reset. And similarly, it would follow a yield protection policy. So that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. All right. So for 2024, if you had average yields, your 95% ECO would have made a payout this year based on that drop in prices. I do want to give two cautions though. So you still have your deductible. It still only goes up to 95% of expected. Also, it might not pay out when yields are higher than average. It's still, assuming you pick that underlying revenue protection policy, it's still a revenue product. So it is going to provide more price protection, than people who've historically had that, say 70 to 75% RP. But it's also important to think of that where there isn't as much overlap with hedging. Next, I want to go through a new tool. And what this does, it really combines what Robin has been doing. And I know a lot of people use that tool. It gets, I think, some of the most downloads from Ag Manager, with information on SCO. I think one thing to say, in a lot of cases, especially if your base acre crop is different from your planted crop, you may just want to directly compare ARC and PLC. So if you have corn base, you're planting soybeans, those two decisions won't affect each other. So you could do them separately. But where I think this could be useful, situations where you have limited base acres, where also you want to see the dollar amount of protection. So we're going to take into account base acres. We're going to take into account that ARC and PLC pay on 85% of base. We also take into account the sequester, which was from a couple political cycles ago, but it's still in effect. So 5.7% decrease in those payouts. You may want to compare protection when the market year average price and the harvest price are different. This will allow you to do that. It may be useful in understanding the relative shallow versus deep loss protection of these policies and what type of situations they do and don't make payouts. And this third point, this one actually, I went through a bunch of examples for Kansas, and it kind of surprised me. There could be a lot of counties that have very different ARC benchmark yield from their RMA expected yield. And I'm going to go through that by this example that I have up next. So this is an Excel tool. I'm going to kind of show you it piece by piece, and we can do a live demo later. But you're going to have to enter some information. There are instructions on the right. So if you're like me, maybe you don't read the instructions till you have a problem, or you can read the instructions first, whatever works for you. We try to make it as intuitive as possible. And it is a lot of information. So, you might want to sit down with your crop insurance agent or your local extension agent or some other trusted advisor that's comfortable with this. But first of all, you have to enter your state and your county. This is for everywhere, not just for Kansas. And then you enter your planted acres. So I've made this example for Nemaha County in Kansas with 150 planted acres. Your base acre crop is corn, so I'm going to set those to be equal. This is the most relevant comparison when you're planting the same crop that you have base in. So I put in the base acres here. I set them a little bit lower than the planted acres. Then you have to pick your ARC and PLC practice. So irrigated, non-irrigated, or all. This is where you kind of have to be careful, because if you don't enter the right one, it's different by county. You might not get an output. Next, PLC program yield. Like Robin's tool, this is set to the county program yield, but you're free to enter your own. And then it's going to, if you downloaded the earlier version, I didn't have this, but I think it's actually pretty important. So that ARC benchmark yield, it's going to show that's 184 here. Keep that number in mind. And then you have your benchmark price, and then your PLC effective reference price. So that will all populate. The ones in red, that's for what you think the future might hold. So I set a situation here with sort of a shallow price loss and where yields are at the RMA expected yield. So then you have to go over here, insured crop practice and insured crop type. So these follow each other. So again, if the subsequent cells aren't populating, it might be because, say, it was on corn and then you switched to soybeans, and you may have to switch that crop type. So you got to play with it a little bit, or again, just call one of us and we'll help you. Okay, so next you're going to have to enter your farm APH yield. I set that at 145. Coverage level, I set that at 75%. Next, projected price, 468, still in discovery. And then you can enter your SCO premium. So that's going to give you your net payouts if you want those. You don't have to enter it. I pulled it from the RMA website. Can also guess or talk to your crop insurance agent. Expected county yield, that's going to automatically populate. So I do want to point something out here. So for Nemaha, that expected county yield, that's based off of historic data from RMA. So you think about your AP, this is, 10 or more years of data. I like to think of it as average yields adjusted for the trend. So that benchmark yield, that's based an Olympic average based off of 5 years, because it's a shorter period, there can be noise or more randomness. And I pulled up several examples for Kansas where I did see this. So Northeast Kansas has had relatively good corn yields for, I think, since 2018. So they have 184 for their ARC benchmark yield, but their RMA expected yield based off of a longer series of data is 158. So their expected yields are quite a bit lower. That's going to make ARC payouts more likely, assuming this expected yield is a more accurate number. And I've also seen several counties where it's the opposite, where that benchmark yield is lower than the expected yield, and that's going to affect your guarantee. So we'll look at that next. Okay, there we go. Oh, sorry. It'll touchy here. Okay. So you're going to get two tables from this. So the first, this is your liability if you're talking in crop insurance terms, or your maximum payout. And this is on a per planted acre basis. So, if you only get it on your base acres, if that's quite a bit smaller, we're going to estimate that for all of your planted acres. And that's really why our guarantees are relatively high this year, but that's why it's a little bit lower here. So your SCO guarantee is almost $75 an acre. That ARC guarantee is $65 an acre, and PLC is $170. And I knew, and this is because, again, it will pay on the difference between the loan rate, anything between the loan rate and the effective reference price. I actually, when I saw this, I'm like, Robin, this is really high. That's what it would do. Although if we're in a 220 corn world, that's going to be kind of crazy in a lot of ways. So, but that is the actual maximum. Next, this is a table that you can enter the market year average price, the FSA county yield, the RMA county yield, and the RMA harvest price, and it's going to give you your SCO net payouts. So here SCO actually did, in this situation, SCO pays out a little bit, but it's not higher than your premium, so that's a negative number. ARC is going to pay out the full amount here. So for this situation is really where you see the impact of those relatively high ARC guarantees this year. At $4, PLC is going to pay out $21.50. Again, those are, let me go back up here. So those numbers in red correspond to the red numbers that you entered. That could be anything that you think could possibly happen in the future. So, you could use this if you want to look at what are my payouts if harvest price are different from market year average, you can do that. Next, this first one, I have 3 tables and they are subsequent tabs in the spreadsheet. And I've seen some comments that people are Mac users, and I'll look into what we can do about that. I'm not a Mac user, but that's perhaps a way that we could figure that out. And so this table is almost the same as what Robin does on her spreadsheet. The only difference is that it's on a per planted acre basis. So we take into account that these programs pay off at 85% of base, and there's a sequester, and they might not be paying out on all planted acres. And I put in the quadrants from the previous charts here. So, and they're rough because I mean, it's not gonna, trying to approximate where you're in this green area, again, Eagles, where your revenue is higher than expected. Red is where it's lower than expected, and both prices and yields are lower than expected, and yellows when they're moving in different directions. And here you can see $64, that's the ARC maximum payout. And except in these sort of high price scenarios where you have, corn that's above 550, and not too large of a yield decline, a lot of scenarios where ARC is paying out at the maximum. Okay, next, this slide is SCO and PLC. Again, on a per planted acre basis. So it's like the previous one, but instead of ARC, it's SCO. So if you look here in the green quadrant, that's negative $11. So revenue is higher than expected. You don't get a payout, but you still have to pay your premium. Your PLC payouts are here. Oh shoot. There we go. This red quadrant, you're netting with SCO $63 an acre. So pretty similar to ARC, not too different. In this yellow quadrant, it's also the SCO premium. So if this actually gets at you do kind of have more of a gradient here, but it's pretty narrow, so it doesn't show up. Then again here for the low yield, these are your low yield, high price scenarios here in the upper yellow quadrant, where, if your yield loss isn't too high, that doesn't pay out, but then it does start paying out up to those higher levels where you start to see the benefits of the harvest price option. This next one, this is a one where takes a little bit more staring at, I guess. There's a lot going on here. So this combines the previous 2 tables. So it's the SCO plus PLC minus ARC. So a value in green means that SCO plus PLC is larger. If you see the numbers in red, that means you're better off with ARC. And so, we can go through these. Again, in the green, you're paying that ARC premium. That's pretty straightforward. In this lower yellow quadrant here, sorry, I think it's so sensitive. You're paying that premium, but then you're starting to see the PLC paying off despite having those high yield outcomes. This quadrant down here, so 67 cents. So here, that's where they're about equal in this really more shallow loss type of situations. You have higher payouts for the deeper losses, that's SCO plus PLC. And then up here, you have higher SCO payouts. The one thing I want to say here, and this is important, is that the outcomes closest to here, to the middle, are the most likely. So those shallow loss outcomes are most likely. And so you can see here, if you're looking at shallow losses, you have those higher guarantees, you're getting higher payouts. You're not paying the SCO premium. But when you get to deeper losses, the story is a little bit more mixed, which is consistent with what Robin talked about. So I'm going to move on now, but again, I'm going to stay on afterwards. We can go through different counties, different scenarios, different states, whatever. And I can get into more detail. There's a lot of information here. It's taken me a long time to absorb it, but hopefully it can be helpful in making these risk management decisions. Just want to recap quickly. I think the reality is a lot of producers are going to decide PLC and ARC separately before they make their crop insurance decisions. There's key exceptions here. When you might, and again, this is personal preference, but when you really might want to thinking about them together are situations where you have limited base, or having that revenue target or that break-even revenue protected is really important for your operations. For producers where the ARC guarantee does look attractive this year, but you want to get that higher revenue guarantee, one option to explore is ARC plus ECO. This is definitely not a personal endorsement, just something I think that people that want to do that are going to be exploring this year. The wild card here is ad hoc payments. If we get into some of these situations, say because of a trade war, there's a possibility of ad hoc payments. Whether you want to take that into account is a personal decision. Brady Brewer and I did a webinar last week that's on Ag Manager that gets into, whether you want to consider that or not, and what are some different strategies. Next, just a quick recap on high coverage policies. It could be attractive for producers that want a higher pre-planting break-even revenue guarantee, or want to protect their profit margins. They're willing to pay a higher premium for this. With any high coverage policy, I think that long-term perspective is important, especially because this is higher cost. Last point, you're also going to want to consider operations versus county yields, understand all the potential outcomes, and try to avoid disappointment, or at least understand the likelihood that these could move in different directions. We do have tools on agmanager.info. First of all, we have an ARC and SCO and ECO payout calculator. This works a lot like the one on the other tool to the national level, but here you can do yield protection and revenue protection with the harvest price exclusion. It's not on the screenshot here, but this is also going to give you potential ECO payouts. So that might be, I know a lot of people have been using that over the past few years. Next, we have crop insurance maps. They used to be in PDFs, but we updated these. This goes back to 1990. It's an interactive tool, so you enter irrigated or dry land, what your crop is, what year you want. For 24 and 25, this is going to show you expected yields for corn, soybeans, wheat, and grain sorghum. We also have some earlier analysis we did on the historic likelihood of ECO and SCO payouts and loss experience for selected Kansas counties. Next, there's a Kansas County yield correlation tool. I only did this for Kansas. I think some crop insurance agents do have similar tools that probably work at the national level. But you just enter your yields back to 1990 for a particular crop in practice, and it's going to show you a chart that compares them to the RMA county yields and also gives you a correlation coefficient. So how strong is that relationship? What's important more is not necessarily how much the same they are, but whether they move in the same direction. Next, agmanager.info. A lot of resources here. Robin and I, our contact information is here. We always enjoy it when producers or crop insurance agents or anyone else reaches out to us, so don't be shy. If you also have a relationship with a crop insurance agent or your local extension agent, they can be great resources. Also, I'd like to end on more of a note of optimism. So I've been talking about tight profit margins. and the circle of disappointment. And that's based on reality, but this is a commodity business. If producers have been around for a while, they have experienced tight profit margins before. Prices go up and down. So hopefully some of these tools and information we have help you manage that risk till prices go up again. Look forward to further discussion. Thanks.
All right, I think I answered quite a few things in the chat, but Todd, if you want to come on and talk about a couple of things, the one clarification I really appreciate is that they did extend the SCO deadline till April 15th as well. I was not aware of that. So, and you might talk about your most recent comment here.
Yeah, absolutely, Robin and Jennifer. Thanks a lot for letting me be part of this ag webinar again this year. It's always good to listen in. Just a couple of things. We have been notified by the regional Topeka office for RMA that, or risk management agency, that they are going to extend that SCO coverage deadline to April the 15th to match our deadline for the ARC PLC enrollment. However, I would still encourage you to visit with your crop insurance agents just to make sure that you are protected based on that election process there, just to make sure. The other thing I just wanted to say is, we are in the midst of enrollment at this point in time. There are several programs we've talked about in the past as far as economic relief and maybe some disaster recovery programs coming on out later this spring and summer. So we would really encourage producers to take the opportunity. If you have a fairly good idea on how you wish to participate as far as enrollment or election, either ARC or PLC, we would encourage you to go ahead and take this opportunity to reach out to our county FSA offices or our local county FSA offices. Go ahead and get signed up. Then if there is a strong grain market shift late in the sign-up period that may cause you to want to change your mind as far as election, obviously you can always come back and make that change by the April 15th deadline. But if based on what you're seeing now in the grain markets, if you have a pretty good idea on how you're wanting to roll, go ahead and do that now. And then if something drastically would change as far as a market shift, then obviously you could come back and change.
And Todd, I know we've been chatting about this question, but any update on the economic assistance payments? I see we're getting more questions on that.
Yeah, Aaron, hey, and Robin, that is a great question. Officially, was on a call yesterday with the national office and leadership in Washington, D.C. No mention was made of a date yet on when to expect that. I do personally believe it will be right around the March 21st date, and I believe that it will be held very tight. Not much information will be released till just prior to or right around that date as well from the national office. But that's just my personal thinking. But yeah, no new information at this time, but great question.
Thank you, Todd. We have just a little more time for questions here. I think we got most of them in the chat, but if we missed something, go ahead and ask it again. Jenny, I think you had just one there that maybe.
Okay. I did think of a potential solution for Mac users. We can give a OneDrive link. I'm going to see if that works. So instead of downloading the spreadsheet, they could use it in a browser.
Okay.
I got to test that, but we will. I hear you. Thanks for bringing that up. We'll look into it. What was the other? Oh, was it ECO over?
With the private hail insurance?
Yeah. I was just talking to someone about this the other week. So my understanding is that hail coverage is like your RP, so it's going to pay off. It's going to be based on the damage to your field, versus whatever happens at the county level. And I think that's ultimately going to be based on your individual preferences. So, and also, talk to your crop insurance agent. How closely how likely is hail damage historically, and how much is that related to your county yields? Because that's going to have a big impact on how much those line up. You also have to ask the question, if I get hail damage, for an irrigated crop and get that shallow loss, can your operation handle that? Do you want to self-insure that risk? When it's not covered by your underlying policy, versus the, say, ECO, which it's based on the county, but it's going to cover more types of loss than hail coverage. So I think that's a great question. Kind of going to boil down to what type of risk you want to emphasize. Oh, I do not know about Google Sheets. I'll look into that too. That's a good question. I don't know. Does anybody? I had not heard that the SCO deadline had been changed. I don't think ECO is going to be changed, but if anybody's heard anything different, I might have to check with the regional office on that. But if anybody's heard something, feel free to share.
Yeah. Hey, Jenny, this is Todd.
Yep.
For Kevin's question, I haven't heard anything on ECO. The best recommendation would just to reach out to your local crop insurance agent, and they can answer that question for you. I haven't heard specifically for ECO.